So I'm Nancy Peter. Many of you know me from the Philadelphia STEM Ecosystem. We are beyond delighted to do this today. And we are going to be talking about Ecospheres, which is the name that we came up with collaboratively for collections of ecosystems. And I will mention too that collections of ecosystems don't necessarily have to call themselves ecospheres, but ecospheres is the catch-all that we're coming up with. And so I'm going to go to the next slide, and I'm going to ask Jan just to give a brief introduction, and then we will go into our presentation.
Sure, thanks, Nancy, and welcome everybody. It's a very important moment in time because the idea of ecospheres comes from the grassroots efforts of ecosystems that found it really important to do work together, to learn together, and created those opportunities. Like the rural group of ecosystems that now is Ecospheres that came together, the upper Midwest and others that have, in a very grassroots effort, found their way to each other. What we know about communities of practice is that they're only as good as they cultivate innovation and learning together, but even more importantly, that they're as relevant as possible to each other. And when you have 100 and rising in the number of ecosystems, maybe it's time for us to think about being a little more granular, a little more focused, a little more geographic, or a little bit more thinking about themes in which ecosystems are really driving very hard to serve their own communities. And that's the grassroots effort. It was very clear that Pennsylvania and had been thinking this way and working toward it, toward its own thinking state ecosystem. And when it came time to figure out how do we actually figure this out, going to Nancy and her crew was a natural. And here we are at the point of professional development, technical assistance, learning about it together. So Nancy, thanks so much, and to the entire ecosystem work that's going on in Pennsylvania, and to all the parts and pieces. And today you'll get to meet that incredible cast of amazing STEM people and leaders from the state.
Thanks so much, Jan. And we wouldn't have been able to, I'd say, turbocharge this effort without the support of ties, as we all know. Just again, a little bit about me. I work at the Philadelphia Education Fund. I'm the director of the McKinney Center for STEM Education, and we are also the backbone for the STEM ecosystem. And what we're going to be doing today, and apologize for some of the things that keep coming up on my screen, but we're going to really walk you through the toolkit. You should have received a link to the toolkit today. And Angie, if you wouldn't mind putting the link in the chat, that would be really terrific. The toolkit is something that we worked on as a group. It's really phenomenal at this point. The designers did just a great job, and a real shout out to Veronica Gonzalez, who pulled it all together. Unfortunately, isn't feeling well and couldn't join us today. So we're going to walk you through the parts of the toolkit, and before that, we're going to tell you a little bit about the Pennsylvania story and how we created our ecosystem. And for those of you that are just joining us, sorry for the weird thing on the top of my screen. And B, this is just a tease. There's a lot more information that we'll be able to share with you as we move forward in the months to come. One thing is that we are not going to be taking questions throughout the session. We're going to ask you to put your questions in the chat. You can make a general question, you can make a question about a topic, you can direct your question to an individual. And two of our members, Rich Mackerel and Brittany Davis, are going to be collecting all of the questions on a Google Doc, and then sort of bundling them and answering them, or rather asking them at the end, and then you will have a written history of both the questions and the answers. So we're going to try to do that in as efficient way as possible. So I'm going to go through really quickly a presentation that we put together last year for the virtual community of practice. And again, Jeremy or anybody on my team, if you need something from me, I can't see anything except for my PowerPoint at this point. So just unmute yourself and give me a heads up. And a big shout out also, I'm going to be shouting out to people until I'm hoarse. But Demetrius Roberts from the Seed Ecosystem is the one that took my pretty generic PowerPoint last year and created this really amazing presentation. So this again is the history of the Pennsylvania Statewide STEM Ecosystem, which is the ecosphere where we sort of figured out what it is we were doing and what we hope to do. So our work group, when we did this last year, our work group was like 2/3 this size. But these are all the representatives from the Pennsylvania ecosystems, including a couple of other folks that have joined us from the beginning, Winnie Black from Pasayten, Colleen Smith from Penn State. And this is a work group. These people do work. It has been phenomenal to work with this group, not without its, I would say, challenges, you know, but at this point, I think I could go away for this group with a week and we'd probably all have a good time. So we are going to run this video, and I'm not positive it's going to run from the slideshow, in which case Jeremy is going to be my backup, but we're going to try this today. So I cannot run it from this slideshow. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to ask Jeremy if you could try to run the video from where you are.
Hey Judd, what's up, man? Thanks for meeting with me. I appreciate seeing you. And I just left that session and I saw your capstone for Lead STEM. That looks like a pretty cool program.
Yeah, the Lead STEM process and the journey has been excellent. I couldn't ask for anything more out of a program from the STEM ecosystem folks.
I'm thinking about doing it. I have some ideas of projects that we can do in our Commonwealth.
Oh, without a doubt, Dr. Roberts, you'd be an awesome member of the Lead STEM cohort too. Each member of the cohort is a great colleague and somebody to bounce ideas off of, and they really spur one another to get through the capstone journey and get to the completion of your project.
You think I can at least get a recommendation from you?
You just let us know, and we're all in and supporting you through the Lead STEM program and really helping to make sure that it's a positive experience for you. Just let us know.
All right, I'm in, man. All right, I'll talk to you soon, and I'll see you around the rest of the conference.
All right, awesome. We'll see you around. Take care, Dr. Roberts.
Yeah, take care.
Hello?
Hey, what's up, Judd? It's me. How you doing?
Hey, D. I'm doing well. What can I do for you?
So I'm calling. I'm ready to start thinking about this capstone project. I'm thinking we need to do something where we bring together all these ecosystems, formal and informal ecosystems in the state, and we do some sort of convening, we do some sort of ongoing engagement.
We might want to pitch this idea to the ecosystem leads. We got that monthly meeting that has all of our partners, whether it's Sandy from Lancaster County or Nancy from Philadelphia, LaTrenda from Pittsburgh. We got the Carbon School Formals. That may be a good group to pitch the idea to.
All right, I like that. So how about this? I can put together a little bit more notes around like what that might look like. And if you can give me a shout out at one of the coalition meetings, maybe that'll be the time where we can get some momentum to see who we want to engage in building something like this.
No, that sounds like a good plan. And, you know, if I don't get back to you right away, you know, please just ping me, hit me on a text or something, but I'll take a look at the document. We got that upcoming meeting. You know, just give me some gentle reminders and then we'll pitch it to the team.
All right, and I'll see you soon.
All right, take care.
All right, take care.
Bye. Hello?
Hey, Judd, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well, Dr. Roberts. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm working on this lead STEM capstone project. I haven't made much progress. I know I sent you over some notes. I'm thinking we might need some help, man. What do you think?
Hey, you know, I was reviewing the notes and the outline you have for the project. I think it's spot on. I'm wondering if we could think about, you know, putting together some efforts with Nancy Peter. She's been reaching out recently regarding, you know, bringing all of this work together under one tent. I think it might be time for us to connect with Nancy and see what expertise she could lend to this project.
I can use some hands, man. Let's call her up, send her an email, see if we can get her on a call.
All right, I'll reach out to her today and then we'll get her back.
All right.
All right, thanks, Dr.
All
Roberts.
right, talk to you later.
Hey, Dr. Roberts.
Hey, Joe, what's up?
Hey, I got us on a three-way call with Dr. Peter, myself, and you. I just wanted to circle back on this whole idea of PA United and what we can do to move all of this work forward around your capstone.
I've taken it as far as I can. My hands are getting busy here with all this coronavirus stuff going on. I need help. I don't know if I have time to devote in this. Nancy, you have time? How's everything going for you?
I was hoping you would ask. I am so excited to do this work. You guys have done all the really big thinking and the brainstorming and the visionary stuff, and I'm ready to give it some wheels. So we can start by convening a work group to really figure out what we're going to do short-term, long-term. We need to create a comprehensive distribution list of all of our stakeholders. I think it'd be great during COVID to have weekly meetings, which we advertise, and then we can have guest speakers, and then we can have follow-up notes. But wait, I'm not done. After we've been together for a week or two, we can write an NSF grant together, and then we can create retroactively the norms for working together. I have so many ideas on how to give this a little bit of traction.
Well, you know, Dr. Peter, I love that you're able to hit the ground running and put legs on this project. The only ask that we would have here at the Department of Education is that we really rely on those initial stakeholders. So if you remember our monthly meetings, let's make sure that work group you put together includes all of our formal and informal STEM ecosystems. That's really the only ask we have here on our end.
And I'm already working on the first email, and I promise both of you that you'll get several emails from me within the next hour, peppered by a few texts and 1 or 2 phone calls. But I will definitely engage that first stakeholder group, and we can build from there.
I would expect nothing less. I knew, Dr. Roberts, as soon as we got Dr. Peter on the call, we would be able to move this project forward with an accelerator attitude.
Well, that's what I love to hear. Somebody that's ready to run and rip and take it forward. So all the meetings, the emails, the phone calls, Nancy, you lead the way and let me know what I can do to support you.
I definitely will. Thanks, guys. I'm on it.
Hey, thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
So I love the fact that somebody mentioned that it was all done in real time, because it was totally not done in real time. And we, like other, I guess, directors, tried to film it in a sequence where it looked like Judd grew a beard really, really quickly. We love this video. Obviously, all of us, most of us in the chat are from my group making fun of one another. So it's one big happy family. But this really is a lot about how we develop this. And it was clearly a combination of, you know, the left brain and the right brains among us coming together and bringing it to fruition. I'm going to go through these slides really quickly. I hope. So what transpired, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out what we were going to do. And these are all the many things that over the last couple of years, the Pennsylvania Statewide STEM Ecosystem has been able to do. And I'll mention also that we...
Nancy, I'm sorry, you're not showing the slide if you're trying to show it.
Oh, okay. Let me do that. Thank you so much. I need to go back to sharing my screen. There we go. Is that better, Betsy?
Yes, it is.
Okay, terrific. So we created a lot of projects, and some of them, as are indicated here, are immediate, and we're going to talk a lot about these as we go through this. And some of them are ongoing, things that we're still working on. And again, Pennsylvania isn't the only ecosphere that's being able to accomplish all of this, but this is where we've gotten a lot of our experience and a lot of our information for the toolkit. If you're just joining us, I'm Nancy Peter, and we are doing a walkthrough of the toolkit. And if you didn't get the toolkit today, Angie has put it into the chat. We asked that if you do have questions, you put them in the chat and we will answer them at the end. Two of our members are compiling those questions. And to sort of preface the toolkit, which isn't all about Pennsylvania at all, we are just talking a little bit about our Pennsylvania experience. We did have a lot of challenges, which we are still working through. How to communicate with one another internally, how to communicate externally with our stakeholders. It's taken us a while to reconcile our different working styles, and I'll be mentioning that a little later on. Who is our audience for the Ecosphere? Is it simply the ecosystem leads? Is it the ecosystem members? Is it everybody in Pennsylvania? Something that I think all of you can relate to is that we have these really great ideas, but we have a limited amount of time. And it seems like the larger our ambitions, the less energy we actually have to devote to them. So we've had to reconcile that. No designated funding, that should be familiar. Asset mapping is a challenge because we're trying to distinguish a directory of programs from an asset map that shows gaps in services and also an abundance of services. And again, managing this project, particularly during the pandemic. And we'll unpack a lot of these later on. I'm going to turn this over to Demetrius, who's going to talk a little bit about our lessons learned.
Thanks, Nancy. We've had several lessons learned, and I think when it comes down to any ecosystem work, I think you all know on the call that you're going to continue to have lessons learned as you're doing Ecosphere work. So I'm just going through the list. One of the first things we learned is that we really need to get to know our collaborators. We came with this assumption that, hey, we're all doing ecosystem work. We'll know how to build a collaborative ecosystem together. But we learned that we all have different approaches, and we've had different sorts of success with the audiences that we work with. And that has certainly been key to get to know each other, our work styles, the things that we do well, the things that we have done well in our own ecosystems, and how to bridge a gap together. Defining roles, and each one of us are leaders in our own chiefdoms, not only in our ecosystems, but in our jobs. And bringing a group of leaders together, it's certainly important to figure out roles and responsibilities because it's not necessarily the same roles and responsibilities we have in our day jobs or our ecosystems. And so that has been a key lesson learned, to have those honest discussions with each other about what you're willing and able to do to move things forward together. Defining norms. We're still working on defining some of our norms. How do we communicate? Do we email? Do we reply all? Do we use a shared inbox? Do we use chat? Do we text? Do we share each other's phone numbers? we've had to figure all these things out together. And these are conversations that we had to figure out on the fly. But if we were to start all over, we would certainly have some of these conversations up front. I think a big part of lessons learned is respecting differences. We all come from, again, different approaches. Just in the state of Pennsylvania, each one of the regions, areas that we represent are dramatically different. Some of us come from an urban background, some of us are more suburban, some of us represent rural community members, and some of us represent a little bit of everything. And we're not always going to see things this exact same way. And how do we get to a place where we're on the same page? Is that last lesson learned is to start with the why, agree to what really is the true mission of what we're doing, and look back toward that guiding light, that guiding star, to make sure that we're moving toward the same direction, even if we don't necessarily agree on everything. And even if we're trying to figure out all the things I just said in elements 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I guess we asked what's next. Like regular ecosystem work, one of the big things is finding funding. So within our state, we're looking toward opportunities for state funding. Obviously, in STEM and computer science work, PA Smart is a big avenue for that. But we're looking into NSF grants. We applied for an NSF grant last year. We didn't get it, but we're trying to set ourselves up for the next opportunities. Next steps, we need to continually to improve communications internally across our leadership team, our growing leadership team, as we look to identify stakeholders and representatives from all corners of our state, our region that we're representing in this ecosphere, but also improve external communication strategies, because we're working with a variety of industries, education, workforce, higher ed. The expectation can be different for each one of our community members. And then the last thing is we want to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the people that we are working with and that we're engaging. And so we are continually and constantly looking for feedback from the stakeholders that we are bringing together to make sure we're meeting their needs, and that we're not wasting time, and we're having them come back to the table time and time again because the work is meaningful. And so these are some resources that we've shared across the Commonwealth. These resources we want to share with everyone here today. You see the PDE, STEM, and PA. That's kind of an idea of really how we define STEM in Pennsylvania and what brings us all together. We have our email if you want to reach out to us. It's shared across our leadership group. And then we have this PSSE information links, which really shows that we're still working toward our branding. We're still working toward how we represent ourselves and tell our story. And you see kind of 5 unique ways on some of our individual ecosystem or ecosystem partner website. For example, Poseidon is listed on the list. The PA Statewide After School Youth Development Program isn't an ecosystem, but they represent a lot of the work we do and has been a big part of the development of PSSE. So there's some resources for all of you to check out there.
And thanks, Demetrius. And just one more thing about branding, 2 things about this slide, rather. One is that Demetrius created the logo, the PSSE logo, and he described it to us with like blueprints and 3-dimensional models and all sorts of references. It's pretty amazing. And if you look really, really closely at it, at some point, you'll see the Pennsylvania sort of keystone right in the middle of the state flower, which is the mountain laurel on the PSSE logo. But also, as Dee said, we're really trying to come up with a unified message. And so if you went to each of these 5 different websites, there's a slightly different description of the of PSSE or the STEM Coalition. So we're trying to work on that. I'm going to move to the next slide. And I'm going to talk, we're going to actually walk you through the different sections of the toolkit. I'm going to admit this person. And so what we've tried to do, again, we are going to be referencing our PSSE, excuse me, experience, but our conversation about the toolkit is much more broad. And the sections and the presentations that you're going to see are really based on our experience in our ecosphere, but also our individual ecosystems, and also some lit reviews that we did. So we're really trying to present the promising practices to the extent that we can. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Betsy Payne, who will have about 5 minutes. We know we're going through this very quickly, from the Philadelphia STEM ecosystem, to talk about the very, very first section of the toolkit, which is articulate your purpose. Betsy, you're on.
Hello, everybody. And actually, it's the first part of this present, the parts that we have to go through the toolkit, but it's really not the easiest. And sometimes it's the hardest one to come up with. And like we were mentioning before, a lot of these things are still in process, even though we have them. They're not set in stone, but your purpose should be the one that's most set in stone. And here you're seeing this from Disney Institute. The common purpose goes beyond the mission. It's everything that unifies the principle of what we do. So we started having meetings not so long ago, and we decided, of course, we need a mission and a vision, which we actually started with. And my colleagues will probably say, oh, we have a purpose statement too. Well, we are in the process of developing it. But it's different. The purpose itself is something that drives everything. And if we use Disney as an example, Disney's purpose is to make people happy. Everybody knows that. Everybody, the janitor, the person who does Mickey Mouse, everybody knows. But they have a mission statement and they have a vision statement. So if you go to the other slide, Nancy, if you notice that the mission is the what, but the purpose is the why. It's a heartfelt thing. It's different. It's a calling. So the purpose it is not as lofty as the vision. It's very emotional. So I'm going to use ours as an example. And again, my colleagues were saying that the purpose, this is again something that we can work on. So if you show our example, Nancy, I will use, that would be the next slide. So what do? We, through purposeful cooperation, collaboration, all Pennsylvania STEM ecosystems will be aware of, will improve upon, and will provide equitable access to and inclusion in quality STEM education. That's what we do. We get together, we have meetings, but now that's not necessarily what we started doing, and you'll see it in our purpose. Now the vision, of course, is what we would like to see happen, that all Pennsylvania will have access to quality STEM education and career pathways, and becomes tomorrow's leaders, influencers, and problem solvers. So again, that's loftier than the mission. The mission is the step-by-step stuff we do, but the purpose, why we do it, and basically it's to improve the life of the students in Pennsylvania. It's to improve all the students. We don't have here K through 12, we don't have whatever, because there's so many different types. So our purpose is to improve the life of students through STEM, through cooperation. Now, this is not how we started. We started, as Demetrius said in the video and Nancy was talking, we started as, how do we collaborate to help each other? We have a lot of stuff going on. How do we collaborate? So it's almost like a group of, hey, let's help each other out. But then we realized that it's much more than that. So again, it's something you work on, but once you have it down pat, every decision you make is easier to make because you have a mission. Does it fit the mission, and does it fit the purpose? So that's why it's so important. Hard, and it won't be the first thing that you'll get done and agreed upon, but it's really important. It's a blueprint for everything you're going to do. With that, Nancy, I'll let you go for the next one.
Thank you, Betsy. I love Betsy, but I love everybody that I work with for the most part. So I'm going to talk about identifying leaders and core partners. And Yolanda McLeod was supposed to do this. Unfortunately, she had to attend a funeral, but it gave me an opportunity to find the perfect illustration for this part. And I'm not going to talk just about PSSE because we are focusing a lot on our experience with Pennsylvania, but I'm going to talk really more about my experience in general on working with teams of people and identifying leaders and core partners. With the Philadelphia STEM ecosystem, I handpicked people that I wanted to work with who represented diverse perspectives and different ethnic and racial and socioeconomic groups, but also people that I knew were easy to work with and were hard workers. With our Ecosphere, we obviously didn't have the luxury of handpicking people, which is a really good thing. We convened all of the ecosystem leaders. And we've had to learn to work together well, because there's a lot of strong personalities and a lot of very, very different work styles. But I also think that over time, it's been obvious, who the worker bees are and who are not as involved. And that's really developed into a core group of people. I do think, though, and I know Lexi's going to refer to this as well, in all of the networks that I've worked in and all of the networks that I've convened, sooner or later, you need to have a core group of partners that work well together. And one of the things that we say in the toolkit is that this ecosystem and ecosphere work is not for the weak of heart. And it gets messy and it gets ambiguous. And a great example is, I'm much more of a pragmatist. I'm going to say, well, what are we going to do tomorrow? And then there's other people that will say, well, let's step back and what's our 5-year plan? So you need that combination of personalities, but you also have to have a group of core partners that, I'll say for the 5th time, work well together and complement one another. And sometimes, I guess, assembling that takes a little bit of finesse. And with that, I am going to turn it over to my partner in crime. And I say this because I don't think I could do what I do with PSSE without the help of Lexi and her incredible organizational and logistical skill sets. So Lexi, take it away.
Thank you, Nancy. Hi, everybody, and good afternoon. I'm Alexandra Konstern-Grushinsky, and I represent the NEPA STEM ecosystem, but I'm also here as part of the leadership team for PSSE. So thank you for the kind introduction, Nancy. So my section has to do with establishing a governance structure. So at some point when you have folks recruited and you have identified your purpose and your mission, you're going to have some sort of governance structure. And so that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about today with you all. So to begin, what we recommend is to start with a coalition of the willing. And those folks, if they are willing, tend to become your initial leadership team. And then from among those folks, usually there is a coordinator or some sort of leader that comes out of that. For us, it's Nancy Peter. And for you, of course, yes, for you, it may turn into someone else or maybe perhaps more than one person. But those folks kind of volunteer to become the coordinator of the leadership team. So of course, these people have to have the bandwidth to fulfill this role, and the leadership team can help them define what those roles and responsibilities are for that person. Because if that, is that person going to speak for the leadership team? Are they not going to speak for the leadership team? How is that interplay going to happen? And then of course, it's always good to try to find funding for those folks to be that coordinator piece to it as well, because those are additional responsibilities, additional time beyond being a part of the coalition of the willing of the leadership team. And then to establish roles on those leadership teams. Beyond that, are there going to be other roles and responsibilities among the leadership team? What is that leadership team going to be responsible for within that governance structure? So the next piece is kind of about decision making. So once you have a group that is the leadership team, once you've kind of nominated or selected or self-selected a coordinator to be part of that, to lead the leadership team, it's decision making time, because there's probably lots of decisions that need to be made that you either are aware of or that you'll become aware of as you go through. And so some of the questions you may want to consider is how will the leadership team make decisions? And will you communicate with stakeholders about every single decision, or is that not necessary, right? If it's appropriate to share that with your stakeholders, then we would recommend that you should share those decisions with them. Are you going to use parliamentary procedure? Is that appropriate for the group, or maybe not? As the coordinator, does that coordinator have veto power? So if the leadership team is going in one direction and the coordinator would like to go in a different direction with the leadership team, does that coordinator have veto power so that the decision can get made? Are you going to vote? If decisions seem big, one of the things that our group recommends is taking time for some discussion and reflection before deciding. The one thing, though, that we would recommend do not fall into, which many groups can fall into, especially in their early stages, is something called analysis paralysis, where you're spending all of your time discussing and reflecting and not enough time actually making decisions and moving on. And so you want to make sure that you avoid that so that those decisions get made in a timely way. And then, of course, you want to leave room for revision of those decisions as you go along, because a decision that was right for you in January may not be right for you in March, April, or the following January. And so you want to leave yourself that opportunity to make those revisions if you need to in your decisions. And the next thing you want to think about is terms, succession, and longevity. So if you get to the point where the folks on the leadership team have been doing those roles, or the coordinator has been doing that role for a period of time, you may want to think about succession, longevity, those kinds of things, because most of us, being leaders in our different fields, have the opportunities to get promoted, to go on to bigger and better things. In some cases, enjoy well-deserved retirement. Those kinds of things will happen as you go along, and you don't want this governance structure to fall apart merely because some of those founding members are no longer participating to the level at which they had initially. And so you want to kind of think about that, is what can we erect as an ecosphere that will continue beyond us? How can we build that and have it be sustainable beyond us? So will that leadership team have term limits? How will you replace empty seats as necessary? How will you handle succession in an equitable way? So right now, as an example, our current leadership team is made up of representatives from the 8 formally recognized STEM ecosystems in Pennsylvania. As Nancy and Demetrius mentioned earlier, that was deliberate. And that the impetus for the work was explained also by Demetrius and Nancy. We were trying to unite Pennsylvania ecosystems. And so that was a logical step for us to make when we were building that leadership team. And so what you need to figure out in terms of this longevity is, what benefits does being part of that leadership team have for the regional ecosystems that choose to participate? And so if you can articulate that in a clear way, then that will help with your longevity. It'll help with folks continuing to be interested in putting sweat equity into the process of whatever your ecosphere is trying to do. The next piece that I'm going to talk about is gathering stakeholder input. And so we've established our governance structure, we've done some of those other steps. And so now one of the things that you want to make sure that you're doing is that you're gathering that stakeholder input. And so for us, we worked on something called focused outreach. And so we tried to keep the outreach that we had into our stakeholder groups focused. We needed to decide before we asked our stakeholders any information that we needed from them, what information we wanted to gather. And so we had lots of discussions talking about what do we want to know from our stakeholders, and how is that important for us to be asking that information. You also want to be cognizant of things like sample size, stakeholder groups that are represented, geography. Part of that is going to be however that ecosphere gets formed. And so that's going to kind of help govern what kind of information you want to learn about your stakeholders and what kind of input you'd like from them. It also could have something to do with the direction that you'd like to go, the mission, the vision, the projects that you're working on. That's going to help guide what you ask about from your stakeholders as well. And you want to make sure that that messaging is clear and relevant to all sorts of types of stakeholders. If you're surveying all of your stakeholders about something, make sure that that survey makes sense to an industry partner as much as it makes sense to a nonprofit, as much as it makes sense to a K-12 institution, and that we're all speaking each other's language. And so we understand the importance of getting that information back to the leadership team. And also, be careful and cognizant of survey fatigue. Many different surveys, all one after the other. Survey fatigue is definitely real. So be strategic about how and when you collect information. And of course, make sure that you do something with that information once you've gathered it. And so if you are gathering information, it should be for a purpose, and those purposes should have action items within them somehow. And so make sure that you have those and that you do something with the information that you get, and that you make action items based on that. And the last piece that I will share with you is something that you guys have in your appendix, which is an example of how we made an action item based on stakeholder input. And so we have a memo that was given out to the Biden administration about what Pennsylvania would like to see in terms of STEM education and what we would hope that they would support us in different types of policies. And so we developed that policy memo based on input we received directly from our stakeholders in Pennsylvania. We developed a survey, we deployed it, we gathered that information back from the respondents, and what the respondents said were the most important to them directly impacted the way in which we created that memo, and the information was contained in there. And so that was one of those very straight line from stakeholder input to action item examples that you guys can see as a method that you could replicate. And it's also scalable if you'd like to do that in your ecospheres. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Lexi. This was great. And anybody that's just joining us, and just a reminder that we have organized this slideshow to directly correspond with the different sections of the toolkit. Some of our examples are about our Pennsylvania Statewide STEM ecosystem. Some are about our individual ecosystems, and some of them are just a gathering of promising practices. And if you do have questions or comments as well, please continue to put them in the chat. And we promise to get to them as many as we can at the end of this session. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to another one of my partners in crime. And I say this with all affection because I truly appreciate every single person on our work group here. So LaTrenda, take it away.
Awesome. I hope everyone can hear me. And so I think a really important piece of this effort is actually deciding on the work, right? I think an ecosphere, provides the opportunity for people to sort of catalyze and scale opportunities in their region. And it's not enough to really identify bright spots that exist in one place, right? With an ecosphere, you can see a bright spot that exists. And because, there are similar ecosystems around it, right? Maybe that bright spot can be replicated in another area. And so the ecosphere allows for the opportunity to create ripples and to create just more activity. And so how can you do that, right? And so after you've gathered the stakeholder input, like Lexi shared, you really want to connect your goals with your audience. At PSSE, we cared a lot about access and opportunity. That's what Betsy shared as our sort of mission and vision for the work, right? And so our biggest focus began with just sharing what's happening, right? There are a bunch of stakeholders connected to STEM in the state, and knowing the makeup of our state, we knew that there were large urban centers, right, in different parts of the state, and then a bunch of rural sort of areas and networks in between, formal ecosystems, sort of non-formal ecosystems or informal ecosystems. And so most of the time, half of the battle really is just getting the word out about what's happening, about those bright spots that exist. And so we sourced from our working group, sort of from this sort of governing group that was talked about, ideas, and we began to sort of recruit speakers to share on a regular basis about the things happening in these bright spot areas. And so that was just one consistent thing that we were able to do for a bunch of stakeholders across our state, is just, like I said, elevating and amplifying those bright spots. The other piece is, I think when you bring people together, right, to think about, catalyzing opportunity and scaling different things, right, you begin to identify where duplication exists. And so one of the other pieces that we were able to do in Pennsylvania was sort of help our state just reduce some duplication as it relates to a bunch of email lists, right? We have a number of stakeholders connected to STEM across our state, and many of us were on duplicating lists, right? And so sometimes we would get an email related to, a grant opportunity here, and then maybe we would get another email that had the same grant opportunity, but it had something else focused that could have been helpful for the other list, right? And it was just confusing in terms of, who was a part of what. And so just that reducing duplication, I think, was helpful and provided some clarity, not only to the stakeholders, but also, I mean, that was a huge sort of output as it relates to our work in terms of ensuring that the audience, the correct audience, was getting the correct information. So we combined some lists and we created one audience. The other piece around this is developing initial metrics, right? Determine what success looks like together, right? What does it look like with your working group? And figure out what that is. It can be large or it can be small. Like for us, right, success was holding regular meetings, coming up with one combined list, right? One combined list of stakeholders to include as it relates to all of this information. You have to determine what success looks like for your ecosphere, and just aim towards that success. The other piece is really just about being fluid, right? You need to be fluid and you just need to start. We can overthink a lot of this, right? And often we do, but one, if you're working with a bunch of different stakeholders, you need to just be flexible in one, how they're made up, right? People have different levels of engagement with their ecosystem, and also people are funded differently. They have different roles in their ecosystem. So being fluid and knowing all of that, and giving yourself grace to just, do some things as people can do them, and just picking up the slack where you need to, is just really helpful to moving the conversation forward and starting the work. And then the other piece here is, we're in our second year of doing this work, and we're still going back and forth on a bunch of our strategies and our own strategic actions, but we had to just start somewhere, right? We had to just start. And so get some consistency with your stakeholders, continuously meet with them, but be consistent. And I think things will evolve over time. And yeah, and that's it. Oh, the last piece, I wanted to say this, and I think Jeremy referenced it in the chat, but add value, right? And I think, if you're listening to your stakeholders and you're getting their input, it's super important that you're not just creating another meeting for them to attend, right? So connect the stakeholders' input to some actionable steps, right, that you follow up on, as Lexi mentioned, and add value to their lives. Don't make it burdensome for them to opt into your network or the ecosphere.
Thanks so much, LaTrenda. And you just remind me of something as well, is that folks will notice that a lot of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pieces all overlap with one another. It goes back to what I said before. ecosphere work is messy work. It was really hard to compartmentalize it. And even as we do, we're constantly referring back to all these other pieces as we continue to move forward. And when I say we, I don't just mean the Philadelphia STEM ecosystem or the Pennsylvania Statewide STEM ecosystem, but I mean us as a whole. It's the ultimate iterative process. With that, I'm going to go on to Demetrius and Stephanie, who will talk about diversity, equity, diversity, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm reading 3 different things at once, and how this hasn't just simply been a footnote that we add to everything we put out there to show that we're doing the right thing, but it's something that within all of our work, we've completely taken to heart. So Dee and Stephanie.
Thank you. Thank you again, Nancy. So I wanted to really capture that a lot of times, many of you just see seed ecosystem or PA seed. And I really wanted to capture that the name of our ecosystem in Southeastern PA is really all about equity and diversity. In our local ecosystem work, we wanted to start with the concept of equity, diversity, and really inclusion. And to be honest, in Pennsylvania, we're talking about equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So who knows, we might have to add some more letters to the work that we do. We wanted to start with that up front. And I think that's incredibly important when it comes to the work of developing an ecosphere already. So instead of doing all the talking for this session, and we've done a lot of talking at you, we wanted to ask you all a question. So the first question we have, and Steph, you want to throw a question in the chat?
Sure.
So Steph is throwing a question in the chat, and the question is, first one is, what is one DEI strategy your ecosystem currently employs or uses or has used? So as you're taking a moment, thank you, Steph. As you're each taking a moment to think about that question, I would really want to be an encouragement to all of you as you're coming together as multiple ecosystems to have conversations about DEI in Pennsylvania and in our ecosphere, our ecosystem, statewide ecosystem. We recognize that how we approach DEI is different in each region. Who our focus is on is different in each region. So for example, in our urban centers, it is going to be a lot of conversations that deal with race and equity because we have so many different sorts of people in the urban center. But sometimes in our rural or suburban regions, that's a part of the conversation, but it could be DEI that's more around students with disabilities, or it could be rural, suburban, it could be people of different economic statuses. There's so many different approaches to DEI. And so the strategies for how you have those conversations are really important. So one of the conversations that we agreed upon with PSSE is having a conversation around who is at the table and who's not at the table. And so we ask ourselves those questions all the time, and we try to identify when we recognize when there seems to be people missing at the table, why? Is there a barrier? Is there some sort of systemic issue that we haven't considered, either by the time we host our meeting, the platforms we use, the communication avenues that we use, the people that we invite to our sessions as speakers, as people just to sit in on our meetings. And so those conversations help to move the needle forward in the strategies that you use to bring people together. I'm not going to answer Jeremy's question about a value add completely yet. I think it would be much more fun to have that at the end. But I will say, Jeremy, one of the benefits of having an ecosphere versus maybe what we don't get from the entire international SE COP that we're part of, is we kind of have a unique conversation about the uniqueness of our region. and why certain groups haven't been included. And also there's a uniqueness about the certain groups that exist in our area that we may not think about or have the opportunity to talk about from a national or international level. So like, who are those little organizations? There's an organization in Philadelphia that I would never have heard about if it wasn't for Ecosphere, whose mission is around recruiting more educators of color. And I wouldn't have known about those sorts of groups if we weren't having more regionalized conversations about DEI. And also just regionalized leaders in DEI. So I think what we want to leave you with is another question, as you all are sharing answers to that, is how would you think about your DEI ecosystem strategy at an ecosphere level? It really should be the same. And I hope in your own ecosystem work, a lesson learned would be that you should start for DEI up front. I think it's really challenging when you don't, because you lose people. And sometimes it's hard to get them back when they feel like, especially if it's people who experience not being at the table or not being a part of a conversation. Sometimes it can be a jaded experience. So we encourage you to start with those conversations up front. Use your strategies that you've developed in your own ecosystems, and have honest conversations about how do you get everyone at the table. Steph, did I miss anything?
No, you're good, Dee. It's getting everyone to the table is that key piece that I think we think the most about. What perspectives are missing and who's not in the room, and how can we work to getting all those perspectives there?
Thanks so much, you two. And I did some kind of magic, but I don't know what it was. And I think I finally got rid of the banner at the top. So by the end of this webinar, I think I'll have the technology down pat. I'd like to turn it over to Amanda Smith of Engine of Central PA. I mentioned that Lexi was sort of my lifeline. Amanda's my other lifeline. There are many people on this work group that are really big thinkers and really great workers. Amanda and Smith keep all the, all of the trains running on time. That was the expression that I wanted to use. And so without further embarrassing you, Amanda, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about our communication plan.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. So when we started thinking about getting the message out, we had to figure out who should be invited to this table. And really it's everybody. But we started looking at calling lists of contacts from a lot of Pennsylvania STEM initiatives. And that's because we had the great Judd Pittman, who's also on this call today, as our special consultant to the Secretary of Education on STEM. He held a lot of STEM stakeholder meetings across the Commonwealth back in 2014. So between those lists and then state level STEM grants that we had, both recipients and participants, we had about 3,000 contacts, and not even including ways that we could send out to our own ecosystems and our own networks. But from that list, we decided that we really needed a registration process, which I'm going to share in the chat with you as well. And that registration process is done through Qualtrics, and it lands on many places. One, it also lands on the Pennsylvania Department of Education site, which gets a lot of traction, but then all of our ecosystem sites as well, which for us is also part of a sustainability plan. Then going from that, from gathering contacts, we were also working to create this larger community and make sure that we have consistent communication in place. And so typically I send out anywhere between 2 to 4 emails a month that really go through what's coming up, what are opportunities that are truly a value add to all the participants or members of this larger coalition that we're sending information to. And then just what's coming up and how can they get more information as we go, because really we only have an hour of time every other week where we host a webinar around all different topics, kind of like what LaTrenda was saying, really listening to our stakeholders and what is the need and value add. We wanted to make sure that those webinars are very consistent. And I would also add that, part of the work when we worked on the Biden memo was also critical because we were getting feedback from our stakeholders. From those 3,000 contacts, it dwindled down to people registering so we could see who was coming from where across the Commonwealth. Go ahead and change. Next slide. There we go. So you'll see that this is just an overview, a good snapshot. I'm a very visual thinker of who are all the stakeholders in the state and where are they coming from and how are they getting this information. This shows you all the ecosystems that we have. We have 8 formal ecosystems and they're all color coded. So we could see that the messaging that we were doing across our ecosystems, we also could see this larger participant network or members, what ecosystems they're in. If it's gray, we also have more work to do because we're noticing some of the stakeholders that are coming to the table may have not been folded into the local ecosystem work. So it's also a value add to our group because we're trying to make sure that we're reaching out to others that have not heard of our ecosystem or want to get involved more with the STEM education initiatives that are happening in the Commonwealth. And on the next slide, you'll see just another snapshot. It's showing you what sector, what organizational sector are all these stakeholders from. So you'll see that you're seeing like a teal blue. Most people are actually from our public school district environment. We have a lot of work to do in order to also get out to industries and businesses. It's something that we're looking when we think forward of what groups are missing at this table. But right now we can see it's really heavy public school district sector, which is not surprising because of the work that's been done with Pennsylvania Department of Ed. And that's a great landing site for us for people to find that registration. And lastly, I would show you that one of the biggest challenges right now for us has been this one-way communication. We've been always sharing things. People will send things to Judd Pittman and myself, and then we will share it out to the larger community if it's a value add and it's a state level program, opportunity, grant, etc. But now we're trying to make sure that people know that they have access to the registration list and that this is found on several of our ecosystem websites so that you can go directly there and say, I need to communicate with certain people that are from this sector. They can go through that list and call that themselves and email directly to the people they need to. So this is a reminder that we're constantly doing so that we create a community and that people can really communicate with each other, opportunities, resources, or even problems they're trying to solve. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Nancy to wrap us up with her and Judd Pittman.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And there's something really profound about these last few slides that Amanda provided. The maps are really genuine asset mapping. It's not just simply a directory of programs that we can share, which is certainly a valuable service, but our asset maps show us where there are clusters and where there are deserts, and where there are a lot of school districts, but where there may not be a lot of informal educators all participating. And so we are really using these asset maps to, once again, overlapping in all these different sections to promote inclusion and to truly engage other stakeholders. The other thing on this particular slide, why I'm sticking on it, is pretty ingenious and it's pretty low tech. But as Amanda said, once our ecosphere sort of started getting traction and stature, everybody was sending us stuff to send to everybody else, and it's overwhelming. And so we've created a set of guidelines so that people can communicate with one another. And Amanda can talk about that more after all of this, but it's really worked well. Nobody's abusing the list, and it actually takes a second step for people to communicate directly rather than just ping an email to one of us. So that's really been key. I'm going to turn it over to Judd, who we reference probably in every single slide. And Judd, talk to us about the lemonade stand. I mean, sustainability.
Thanks, Nancy. And I want to thank everyone else for really sharing Pennsylvania's story. If there's one thing that we all need to do a little bit better, it's probably, telling the story and telling the story of the great work that folks in the ecosystem world are doing for students, for caregivers, for their communities. And that's one thing that this group really does well. you know, when it comes to sustainability, one of the core ideas here is that it goes beyond funding. Sustainability isn't just predicated on dollars. It goes beyond that. It's really about human capital. It's about intellectual capital. It's about all of the things that folks have set the stage with already. And I'm just going to go back to a couple of those core elements. And that's the need for common language. If you don't have common language across your ecosystems, across your networks, then you're all going to be going at different things, and you're going to see duplication, and you're going to see folks fall off. You're going to need to make sure that you have a common purpose, that why that Dr. Roberts talked about, or that Latrenda talked about. It's critical that that common language transforms itself into a value proposition and a common purpose. And that value proposition needs to be clear and concise and large scale enough, or 1,000 foot, 100,000 foot level enough that a lot of folks can kind of hook into it and do their work locally or do their work regionally. And then, we really need to make sure that we're throwing caution to the wind and taking a chunk out of some work, taking a bite-sized chunk and begin to get work flowing so that ecosphere has value. When folks see no movement, or that the inertia has stopped it, that's when folks, again, will start to tail off. So regardless of if it's for a Pennsylvania story, if it was an NSF application, if it was revisiting the common language, if it was pruning the listserv, if it was hosting webinars, it was really about, showing that the inertia can move and that work is happening. And probably most critical, and I can't iterate this or repeat this enough, is the idea of going to community. You have to start this process with community. Whether you're developing your common language, whether you're developing your shared purpose, your work groups, your strategies, you've got to consistently go back to your stakeholders and your community members. And that is a messy, painstaking process. And it's got to be beyond survey, whether it's focus groups, whether it's lunch meetings, whether it's happy hours or coffee mornings, whatever that looks like. Meet those stakeholders and community members where they are, elevate their voice, champion their voice. And Lexi said something that is unbelievably critical. It's great to go out and talk to them, but they're going to leave the work as soon as they don't see themselves in it. If they've shared information with you and they don't see themselves in that information that they shared being strategies, whether it's policy, program, whether it's meetings or webinars, then they're going to feel like you're doing the stakeholder work or the community engagement work just to do the community engagement work and not really find their voice and value in it. And then I would say finally, the last thing for sustainability is just to ensure that you celebrate the willing, that coalition of the willing, but you honor and give grace to those who maybe haven't been willing yet or aren't sure where the opportunity is to engage. One thing that we've been really consistent about is that this ecosystem work, you need to dig in when it meets you or meets your region or local's needs. And if you're not there for a little bit, that's okay. It's not like the door's shut. We're always willing to open back up and continue to work with you. So make sure that it isn't just about the coalition of the willing, but it's about those who aren't at the table. Find those gaps and go back to them repeatedly to make sure that they have the opportunity to engage when it fits, and give them the grace and that same level of value as if they were there from day one. I think Eric had dropped in the chat about how do we engage all these different partners. It really comes with grace, humility, and ensuring that they find a value in what you're doing. So make sure that they can see that. And the funding, those other elements will come. We started the work in Pennsylvania without any funding. And, when we look now down the road, the Commonwealth can, pretty confidently say that we're in the top 2 to 3 states across the country in funding for STEM. So that came with the work of community members. It wasn't about any particular individual. It was about the voices that elevated the work and shared their story. So just in recap, make sure you tell your story, give grace, engage community, make sure you have a common language, and have that value proposition, that wireframe for folks to hang their work into. I'm going to turn it back to Nancy.
And I want to add one thing that Judd in particular did that was insanely strategic for Pennsylvania, that I think will ensure our sustainability, is that Judd was really, really clear that he didn't want the center of gravity for PSSE to be in the Department of Education, that he wanted the responsibility and the stature and the recognition to be dispersed across the state, so that if Judd were to leave or there was a new governor, that this wouldn't yet be another initiative that started and finished within 4 years. And I think over time, we've really been able to share the responsibility so that it's not even centered in Philadelphia or in Harrisburg or Pittsburgh. It's truly distributed across the state.
And if I would just add with Nancy on that, it doesn't necessarily have to be the Department of Education. Maybe it's your Department of Labor or it's an anchor institution. Just make sure that the work that you do can stand the waves of the political change, that can stand the wave of transition, and really is centered and distributed across spaces. Our goal has always been that the work with ecosystems becomes the habit, regardless of where it's at, but it's the habit to go to them for understanding what's happening in the field, for designing and implementing evidence-based policy and programs. And by rooting it outside for us, outside of the department, it gives it that longevity to stand the test of time.
And with that, I am going to do one last slide. I'm going to do it quickly, and we want to save the full 15 minutes for questions and answers. So here's a quiz. Since I can't see anything, I'm going to ask Jeremy. I'm going to ask folks if you can answer this question in the chat. And hopefully Gerald doesn't mind that I use this picture. I got it off of his Facebook page, but he gave us an assignment several years ago, and it started with the word but. Jeremy, has anybody answered that so far?
Not so far. I will let you know as soon as somebody answers.
Okay, so I'm going to keep on going, and once we get an answer to that, then you can interrupt me. I could do a 2-hour workshop on evaluation, and I could do a 3-hour workshop on surveys. But I think as we're looking at the outcomes and the measures and the metrics for our ecospheres, these are some of the bullet points that I'll leave you with that have been really useful for me. Be strategic. What is it that you want to measure before you even start? Do not collect more data than you can process. And that's often the case where you get 500 paper surveys and there's nobody to enter the data. A key of surveys and information in general is do not collect more information than you will use. You may not need to know somebody's education degree for what your purpose is. Don't ask them. Self-reported data. There's a lot of debate about this. Self-reported data is valid unless the respondent has a reason to lie. And in the work that we do, they're going to be pretty candid. I always say use other people's measurement tools when you can. Not only have they been tested, but they are research-based, and often then you can compare your data to larger pools of data. And finally, when you can, I'd say engage an external evaluator, if nothing else, at least to coach you along. Jeremy, did I get any responses?
You did. Judd and Lori flipping tied, I think, with but for the ecosystems.
But for the ecosystem, right? So that's your guide, that's your North Star. But for the ecosphere, that's what you really want to measure. What kind of how have you moved the needle by establishing an ecosphere in a way that you couldn't have done otherwise? That's really helped me and us to not necessarily look at student outcome measures, although those are important, and not to look at things that sort of distract us and detract us from the big idea, but for the ecosphere, what kind of success and progress can you measure? And so with that, we have left exactly 16 minutes, no, 14, no, 11 minutes for questions and answers. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I've been told it's annoying. And I'm going to ask Brittany and Rich, if you could give us one of the questions so far.
Sure. One of the first ones we had was what was our biggest struggle, non-COVID related, and how was a solution found?
So of course I can't help but answer that, but then I'm going to turn it over to Betsy. I would say one of our biggest struggles was to go from we are all getting together and talking to each other and sharing ideas among our leaders to how can we have a bigger impact on other people in Pennsylvania. That and learning about our different work styles. Betsy, take it away.
Well, I was going to say the work style was actually something that we really had to work with, actually, because like we've mentioned a lot, everybody's so different, big thinkers, people who want to get things done now, you know, that type of thing. And we actually had a session where we all kind of talked about word styles, and we took, and I'm sorry I forget, Nancy or anybody, one of those, what's the name of the quiz we took? Not quiz, but tells you what kind of style you have. And we discussed it and saw it, and it really, it helped us to visualize and go, of course, Betsy is this way, so she's just better at this particular task, or she's more willing to do this particular task. So I think that was something that was really, a retreat was the word I was trying to find. We had a retreat, and it really did help a lot, I think.
The other thing that seemed to be a bit of a struggle is just finding which bite of the elephant to take first. And it really just got to the point where folks decided to jump in. And that's probably the need for just taking the risk. And regardless if it fails or succeeds, like you've heard folks say, starting some work. And interestingly, the first thing that folks did was decided to go to, go at the grant, an NSF grant, which seems like a really heavy lift, but it really brought folks together. So I think, just starting the work was a really tough one.
And anybody else from our team, other than starting the work, reconciling work styles, want to add anything before we go on? In that case, Rich, what's our second question?
The next one was in terms of the governance structure. And Lexi kind of addressed this. How did you get started determining the governance structure? I think right now I have as the answer to that, begin with the coalition of the willing.
Lexi, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think starting with a coalition of the willing is a place to start. You don't necessarily have to do it that way. I think Nancy talked about handpicking folks that she knew were movers and shakers and doers in the biz. So that's definitely another way to go about it. That's not the only way. But also once you've chosen kind of that initial leadership team is how are you going to organize yourself, right? So are you going to have a coordinator? You're going to have someone that you're kind of nominating to speak for you as a group, so that we're all not trying to figure stuff out all at the same time, and do it in a more streamlined way. And so that's what I would say is kind of a space to start. Beyond that, it gets more complicated as the work gets more complicated, as things ramp up. But I think starting with that group of folks, whether it's the coalition of the willing or whether you're coming up with another way to determine who those folks are, is an excellent first step.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn to Brittany. What's our third question, Brittany?
So the third question we had came from Eric, and I know Judd responded in the chat a little bit, but if anyone wants to add, he asks, ecosystems have always been focused. Oh wait, this is not from Eric, my apologies. Ecosystems have always been focused on hyper-local problems and, sorry, long question, and international learning and collaboration. What has been the value add on this middle layer that you weren't getting locally?
I think I'll start with that, and then I'll turn it over to someone else. I mean, that's a really important question, and there's a consideration and a disadvantage disadvantage is, do you want to add yet another level of administration, but one of the things that we've been able to tease out in Pennsylvania that we would recommend to others is to really purposely not duplicate what your ecosystem is doing. And so a very good example of that is something that Amanda referenced, is that an announcement that's specific to Lancaster County doesn't go out in our listserv. We will direct people deliberately back to their ecosystem. And in fact, we'll get people asking about the Pennsylvania Coalition. We'll first say, go to whatever ecosystem is your key ecosystem. But we will purposefully distribute information that's Pennsylvania wide. And so I think there's this constantly not duplicating what the ecosystem is doing. I'll give you one more example and I'll turn it over to others, is that we don't run programs for kids through PSSE. That would not be a good use of our time. But what we do is we write a statewide policy memo for the Biden administration, which is something that any one of our individual ecosystems either would not be able to do, would not have as much impact. And I'm not sure if anyone else on my team would like to respond to that. Demetrius?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think since I was the first to start championing the need for us to come together, my why was what I just talked about recently. It was embedded in the need for equity, at least in our state. So even now, I know there's, as Amanda showed from the people who attend our meetings, that there was a lot of gray bubbles there for people who are not a part of ecosystem conversations. And in my work that I would do, I kept running into these people and talking about the awesome work that we were doing at an ecosystem level, and people saying, how do I become a part of one of those? How do I get this in my region? Like, how did you start this? How do I do this? Where did you find the money? All these conversations. And I knew that from a national, international level, that wouldn't have been the best approach for finding people in between. And so one of my drivers were having this in-between level. We could really pull more people into ecosystem work by localizing it a little bit more than the national, international level, to get more voices at the table. But what I also know, if you want to talk about the way I think, in our PSSE logo, there's the Mount Laurel is the highlight of that logo. But next to those logos are two smaller flowers. And the thinking behind that is, you never want to be alone, and you want to do this with others. And those two smaller flowers represent others. So even within our own state, I thought it would be so valuable to find others that weren't at the table, not just because they were missing out, but I think we miss out by not having all the voices there to let us know what we don't know. So that middle level, to me, this work has been really important for strengthening STEM in the Commonwealth, but strengthening each other along the way at the same time.
I would just add to what Dr. Roberts shared. It also allowed for the ignition of other communities to find communities like themselves, to know that they aren't on an island doing the work by themselves, that there are other spaces that are trying to tackle similar complex problems or challenges, and that other folks may have failed in that space, and you don't have to repeat those mistakes. The other piece is just with the competing idea of ecosystems, whether it's going back to Eric's question, whether it's next generation sector partnerships out of the National Governors Association, or it's STEM ecosystems, or it's digital promises, League of Innovation Schools. Like, there's all of these different spaces that are trying to own this networked approach or collective impact approach. This strategy enabled Pennsylvania to create this tent under one language, that this is what an ecosystem means in Pennsylvania. Next gen partnerships can hook into it, digital promise partners could hook into it, but this is the organizing factor and the verbiage and the vernacular that we want to use to describe the work.
Thank you, all of you. And I'm looking at the time. We have one more minute. I'm scrolling through the chat. I'm trying to get through all the comments on Judd's beard to some of the more substantive questions. Is there one more short question, either of Rich or Brittany, that you can pose?
Sure, there is one that is kind of shorter in language. It says, who is at the table but not being heard? How can we work to capture all perspectives of stakeholders and ensure everyone has a voice?
And I'll end with that. I think that takes a lot of practice. And I think one of the tensions that we all have when we convene people is, on one hand, trying to move forward, on the other hand, being really, really receptive to and sensitive to new voices at the table. And so I think there's a bunch of strategies which we can talk about later on, about pausing and letting everybody talk, or asking for folks that haven't had a chance to say anything. And it's not dissimilar to a lot of the strategies we use in working with children. But I think that's a really good distinction between having people at the table and making sure that the people at the table have an opportunity to have their voices heard. And I think, like many, Lexi and others said, making sure that when you hear their voices, they understand that you've done something with it and you've truly integrated that into some sort of action. So with that, we're at the hour. Our numbers are dwindling, but it's the core of the willing, as Lexi likes to say. We will be sending the link to this PowerPoint as well as the Q&As, and we will make ourselves available. We will have another webinar probably in the beginning of the year, which will be more about a question and answer and technical assistance. But between now and then, please reach out to us or to me or to ties, and we will continue to provide as much feedback as we can. So with that, we thank you all for joining us today, and we wish you a wonderful holiday season.